Hello, my love. It's so good to have you here. I'm really excited for this conversation, both for my audience, but also for myself, because I am going to learn a lot today, and it's always a pleasure to have a conversation with you.
Oh, well, Ebony, thank you so much for having me on. I'm really, really happy to be here and can't wait to go wherever it is we go today.
Cool. So I always start with the same question, which is, what
Mhm.
is sacrosanct or non-negotiable for you in your life?
Well, what should, and I know we shouldn't have shoulds, but what should be sacrosanct to me, and what I'm really sitting with at the moment, and what January has really brought up for me, is the boundaries around my self-care. And I part of my evolution over the last 10 years is even understanding what self-care is. I had no idea, because I just thought perhaps self-care was having a lie-in. And then really learning what self-care is for me. And as somebody who works in the therapeutic world as a counselor, and a mother and a wife and a friend and a daughter of dementiated elderly parents, there's a lot of people that need a lot of my time.
Yeah.
So how do I create time for myself? So I think that is what I am learning to be very fierce about, putting boundaries around my time and allowing myself time to just be.
And it's a should because it's not a lived reality, or because there's something that trumps it, or
Mm-hmm. Yep, there can be a lot of things that trump it. um, Guilt often. Often, I am a woman and I'm a mother, and both of those components can bring up guilt. And try as I might, that is still a work in progress for me. So some days I'm better at it than others.
It's really interesting to me that guilt could be sacrosanct, and it's not something that we would do on purpose, right? Like no one wakes up and thinks, I know I'm going to live a life where I make guilt sacrosanct. But what dawned on me as you said that, I come from my ancestry is Jewish. And with that comes almost a value of guilt, right?
Yes.
And it's something that the way that my brain works and the way that I am interested in things I've often looked at and been like, what is it? What is the value that we're actually trying to uphold? Because the value isn't guilt, right? The value is family. The value is connection. The value is
Relationships.
showing somebody else that you love them, maybe more than you love yourself,
But that could be linked to guilt. I'm guilty because I'm not allowing, I want to love myself more than or my guilt is I do love myself more than somebody else.
Was guilt modeled to you in your primary relationships?
Oh, absolutely not. Yes. but all very subliminally. And it was gendered.
Yeah.
I was the much longed for baby who was a girl, and I'm sure we'll dig into this later, but something quite traumatic happened to me when I was little. I had an accident, and it shaped our family, and it shaped our relationships, the four of us, because I have an older brother and my parents. And my role from that point on, after I survived, because I nearly died, was, I think my parents were just so grateful, obviously, understandably, that I had survived this dreadful accident. And my role was to be happy and lovely, and not to challenge them in any way. So that's where my guilt comes in. because obviously as a human being, you know, as a little girl transitioning into being a teenage girl, there was lots of questions coming up for me around my gender, around my sexuality, around my neurodiversity, which, by the way, that came much later. But yeah, so guilt was something that I think I've felt quite often as a woman.
And I think we all feel it. I think there is a lot more as women. I think there is a level of that, but I think that there's a lot of you know, the shoulds that we talked about, that it kind of implied right at the beginning. There's a lot of shoulds that then lead to guilt in every single family. And
absolutely.
And I feel like, and I'll check this with you, but my dad's a psychotherapist. He wasn't always, and he isn't only, and it's one of many threads. But as the daughter of a psychotherapist, one of the things I learned very early is that you can know the things and you can see the things in other people's relationships, and you can spend all day helping people with the things, but that doesn't make you immune to them.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. You're not immune to anything. No. You have, if you choose to have responsibility for yourself, then with that comes authenticity. And that's can be a very uncomfortable place to be, being authentic, when your family system has dictated a different role for you.
Do you ever find yourself, because I kind of want to move into us talking about relationships and intimacy, particularly, both as somebody who is interested in authenticity, who works with neurodiverse people, and who also, you know, has who is a therapist, or, you know, who's in this world, because I think that combination makes this conversation, at least for me, very interesting.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And actually, funny enough, I was only having a conversation earlier on this morning with somebody about how different the rules around intimacy and sex can be for neurodiverse individuals. And that I find that very interesting.
It's actually one of the things. So somebody sent me a paper a couple of years ago, maybe only a year and a half ago, about ADHD in women. And on that paper, there was a whole lot of stuff around some of the stuff that is different in women than in men, and some of the things that psychiatrists should be looking out for, or that the data has found in women. And one of those things was, I didn't like the language. I never liked the language, but, you know, that's what it is.
Yes.
It's promiscuity in young women, and being taken advantage of, and sexually active much younger. And it was actually that, amongst other things, that had me go, huh, interesting. And kind of, because it's not talked about very often.
No, it isn't. And it goes in the same group, I feel, as it goes in the addiction group, the dopamine seeking group of activities that often neurodiverse people, through no fault of their own, find themselves falling into. And you know, it really does make me so sad. I'm seeing so many people of our generation talking about how they've been locked into addiction because their neurodiversity was never acknowledged or explained to them. And just that, I see it with my clients when they have the understanding that they might be dopamine deficient, and that's why they've fallen into these patterns, whether it's online shopping, whether it's gambling, whether it's sexual activity, drugs or alcohol.
Yeah.
That it's because their brain is trying to seek that gratification that they need.
I find this fascinating because I feel like for a little while, you know, we have I see patterns and I see buzzwords and themes that come up in the wellbeing space and personal development space. And for a long time, codependency was that thing. And more recently, neurodiversity has become that thing. And for me, there's a very interesting intersection, which I'm not seeing talked about so much, because I have just always presumed I have codependent, so I don't like the I am piece. I've always defended heavily narcissistic people because I think it's it's two parts of a puzzle that are attracted to each other like magnets, and so we can't look at them in isolation. But then when I start to bring in this idea of dopamine deficiency, rather than being a drama-seeking codependent,
Yes.
I were able to look at my own behavior in a completely different way, and like you say, go, dopamine starved, right? Like, what are some healthy ways that I can get this met, rather than causing drama or poking a bear in order to get a response. Does that make sense?
So yeah, it does, absolutely. But let me ask you, Ebony, what did that do for you to just reframe that like that?
What did it do to me to reframe it?
Yeah.
Change the way that my brain was obsessive. So I can get into a loop very quickly, where it's the same question, the same answer, no way out. Same question, same answer, no way out, right? What reframing it did for me was open a whole new set of neural pathways that weren't yet discovered. And so I was able to step out of a really unhelpful loop, which wasn't changing any behavior for anybody, and start to look at ways that I could change behavior for myself that didn't involve and actually had nothing to do with another person being like. So much of my life I blamed either that I was in a relationship or I wasn't in a relationship for how I was feeling. And this new intersection gave me things that I could do for me, which impacted my relationships, but wasn't dependent on them.
So the drama seeking aspect of that, how did that change when you started to
I don't do
join the dots for the
I
dopamine?
don't do it anymore because I've never actually been interested in drama. It was and the distinction between but
was it drama
and dopamine is very interesting to me.
Yeah, I mean, was it drama? That's my question.
No, what I wanted was attention.
Because what did you get from the attention?
Dopamine.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And then you're stuck in that loop for years and years. And if you'd have had that information earlier, you might have.
It might change everything. So one of the things I do in relationship, and I've just witnessed myself do it, and it's a beautiful thing to be in a space where you can see a pattern and have no judgment about it and just see it. But I do what I call running in circles by myself. And to now be in a relationship and not one specific, but to be in relationships where I can name what is about to happen so that they don't get pulled into my riptide and they can just stay consistent. And I can also say what I need. Like, whereas before I would genuinely think that they were causing my behavior rather than me causing my behavior. And so I can get into a whole thing about something that they're not doing right, or that I'm not doing right, or that I'm not being heard. And there's a cycle to it. I can see it now. And then I can kind of come back and I can be like, oh, thank you for not moving. That was really helpful. Because you didn't move in any way, and you have stayed consistent, I can see that I just needed to go and expend some energy. And actually everything's all right with the world and it's all fine. Whereas before, I would pull them into my thing, confuse them massively, break up, get back together, all sorts of stuff, just because I had this extra energy. I don't know whether I'm articulating this very well.
I think you are beautifully, actually. And I think it's just, I'm sitting here thinking on that. So now you have that self-awareness that isn't shrouded in shame. You are able to articulate to the people that you're in a relationship with your patterns, and you're able to ask for what you need. And that's when I go back to when I was talking about guilt, that can be part of it. Feeling guilty that you are asking somebody for something because perhaps you've been told, no, you don't ask, you just wait and smile and somebody will give something to you if they think you've been a good enough girl or boy. So
and I was talking about this the other day, actually, that sometimes we don't ask because we've already imagined what their answer will be, and then we've created the whole rejection sensitivity anyway. And so then often there's the piece of like not knowing what the need is, and then the next hurdle is, okay, I think I know what the need is, but can I articulate it? Then there's like, okay, I'm trying to articulate it, but they're probably going to say no anyway, so what's the point? That's going to hurt. So there's so many hurdles
that are often trauma-based.
Yeah.
And so when we're doing those hurdles, what we're trying to do is self-regulate and to calm our nervous system down. And we think that by trying to jump ahead, we'll be able to control everything.
Yes.
Which we can't ever. It's disastrous. And of that sort of behavior is very isolating as well.
Yeah.
And so to be able to say to somebody like you can now, Ebony, this is what I need, then you're still saying in your parasympathetic nerve, you're not going into fight or flight, because you don't have to, because you're able to say, this is what I need to just be able to keep regulating my nervous system.
Yeah. It's really interesting because I've just had a whole thing where I asked for what I needed and the other person couldn't meet it. And my default response to that, either couldn't or didn't want to, but it weren't able to.
Yeah.
And there's enough space around this whole thing now for me to then recognize that my default pattern of behavior for many, many years, as I learned in childhood, was basically, well, fuck you, then I'm leaving because I'm going to abandon you before you can abandon me.
Yeah, withdrawal.
Yeah.
And that's the fuck you is what I see with couples counselling all the time. And it's a fear response, it's a shame response, and withdrawal is a place of safety. It feels safer. Well, I'm better off on my own because therefore nobody can hurt me.
Yeah.
And so when I'm working with couples, I always say my job is to advocate for their relationship, not for the individuals. And to be able to, rather than them withdrawing, to get them to soften and to take those tiny little steps towards one another, towards each other, being vulnerable, so that they end up back in this really beautiful dance rather than some Mexican standoff.
Yeah. And how helpful, let me think of another question. So sometimes, as an intellectual person, I find I have spent a lot of time looking for the pathology or the reason why, like, or the what's happening inside my body kind of thing, just like you explained. And I see this in my clients as well, right? Like, oh, that's my Valala pattern, or oh, that's because this happened when I was a child. And I really get the understanding part and how important it is. And at a certain point, it's not actually useful anymore. Like doing something different is useful.
It just brings to mind, I absolutely know what you mean, and I've been that person because, as a trainee counsellor and psychotherapist, we had to have counselling, and so I would spend hours after hours in session talking about, being stuck on the cycle of experience, and yes, I mean, I could talk about the theory and all my awareness. But was that my lived experience? Was that authentic? And at that time, no, it wasn't. I hadn't integrated what I was learning to how I went out there into the world. And I think when you're working as we do, we are holding a space that allows somebody to start stepping into that. And that can only happen when the relationship is there between us and our clients. And when and I talk about this really transparently with the clients about challenge and about when I question their way of being, all their patterns. And it's when you can do that they can then start to trust that process.
So I'm curious. So the pattern that I have of withdrawal, and big wall, and it's almost like I can, I've had people on the other side articulate it as it feels like your shutters go up, where you go boom, 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 heart closes, and I've gone, right? That's a
Yes.
very accurate description of what's happening. So there's that. What's some of the other kind of common patterns that you see when in relationship?
Well, generally it's withdrawal, because withdrawal is so powerful, and it's on so many levels. It feels like in that moment you're taking your power back.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand that. When we feel threatened, when we feel scared, we want some power. And it's also punitive. You can really punish somebody with withdrawal.
Yeah. And what about kind of over anxious, where there's a lot of pleading and bargaining and, you know, changing and like trying to placate? Do you see that as well?
Not so, that doesn't present itself so much in session, but I think where I start to learn of a client having that pattern is childhood.
Yeah.
And then we'll start to explore how they may have been as a child, and that can come up, and then but that can quickly turn into the blame game.
Yeah.
Well, she said this, so I did this. He said that, so I did that.
Yeah.
And it's so sad, because actually a lot of the time with couples that I work with, they've just never learned. They've never had those tools. They didn't learn that from their family of origin. And I work with clients of all sorts of ages, but obviously some of the clients I work with are 50 and above. Some of that demographic will have post-war parents or war parents. Now, during the Second World War, the First and the Second World War, there wasn't the privilege of wellness and thinking about our mental health, because it was purely about survival.
Yeah.
So the sort of mental health that I see a lot of the time in sessions, there was just not time for that. There was not time to explore that. And so these people have never learned. And so I think what I hope to provide is a space where they can learn how to talk to one another.
And I was going to say, like, and what is it, if we're just starting this journey, if we're recognizing our relationships aren't working, if we want to create a different relationship dynamic, what are some of the first things that we're actually that we need to learn, or that one gets to kind of go into in order to change how you're relating?
Do you know, a really basic tool for anybody in any kind of relationship is to allow themselves at least 10 minutes before they respond to something that they feel angry about. Because that just will allow you to process what that anger is and why that's pushing your buttons in that way. Just gives you a bit of space, a bit of distance between the feeling, the red hot feeling of anger, or the feeling of being affronted or challenged. So that's really simple. Give yourself some time, and empathy and kindness. I know we hear people talking about kindness all the time, but we make mistakes.
Yeah.
People make mistakes. And some of us have never learned how to talk to somebody with kindness and empathy. So how can we help our partner with that? What do they need? What do you need? What do I need? And a lot of people have never learned to listen.
My giggle was two things. Was I can be really kind, I just don't forget stuff. And so one of my things to add to that is, like, don't bring, and I'm telling myself now, although it's easier said than done, old arguments or old things that happened into today's anger or today's miscommunication or upset,
Oh, I absolutely do. And that is the therapeutic work generally with couples, because they've both got a file of facts full of, or a Rolodex full of all the things that done to one another. And actually that's what we need to work through in couples counselling for sure.
Yeah.
I think it's hard not to bring, I hear what you're saying, Ebony, and I think it's hard not to bring those things in. I think when we do, and we're the person on the opposite side, it's just about really trying to listen to what is it I'm hearing? What do they want me to hear right now? Because 9 times out of 10, it's hurt and rejection.
Yeah. I personally think there's also some stuff that has really shifted for me is not expecting to be treated the way that somebody else treated me. Now, for the most part, you're talking about people who've been together a while and are coming to couples counselling, and I'm potentially talking about people who are starting a new relationship or coming into something new. But that idea that you take your, take the way that other people or old things or the way that your parents were, or these kind of learned patterns into new relationships and almost expect to be treated that way, often creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I think that's my personal revelation at the moment, is that when I expect something different, I get something different. And I never really believed that, because I always really believed it was the other person.
So that's self-agency, and that's responsibility, isn't it? It's like you having an understanding, because you are so self-aware of your, let's say, your neurodiversity, that this enables you to have some freedom and some choice and responsibility around how you step into a new relationship.
Yeah, and I think I come from, and maybe this is just my personal thing, but when I look at other relationships or other my clients and the relationships that they're in, often they're like, he won't come to therapy, he won't come to counselling. And my response is, okay, go alone, because I have moved and shifted and changed so much of my experience in relationship alone. Because it's not all, like, often I think it can be really helpful to be in that space with the other person and you're going to learn a lot. But often we are creating relationships from ourselves. I don't know.
Yes.
I'm not articulating it well, but
you are. And I always use the analogy of it's the pebble in the pond, that ripple effect. And clients will, when I'm working one-to-one with clients, they'll come back in and that's the work. It's so where have you seen the shifts in your relationships with the people around you? And we inevitably spend some time being stuck looking at that same view on the mountain, and we'll go around the mountain several times and we'll still look at the same view, and then suddenly there's a shift and we're looking at the view but from a different perspective.
I think that's the piece of therapy, counseling, facilitation, coaching that you cannot explain to someone, because they can't see a view that they can't see. They have no idea, like exactly that. If you're saying come walk up this mountain, all they're seeing is it looks really steep, rather than the amazing feeling and the view and everything you get from that perspective.
Yes, it's that that inner child is stamping her foot or his foot and saying, no, I'm not moving from this point. This is where I shall stay, because I know this point, and that point up there, that frightens me. And that the fear of change is, the impact of that is massive. It can stop people in their tracks.
Even when it's something that we want and we think we'll do anything for it, there's still a part of us that doesn't want to change because it's terrifying. Because the no, however awful, is more comfortable.
Correct. And I can give you, from my lived experience today, that analogy of cold exposure. So for me this morning, I was going to swim. in the pond, it was, I think the water was 5 degrees, and the air temperature was a lot warmer. 5 degrees is pretty cold, and
Oh.
and you know, I get in that water and my body is screaming, it hurts. You know, that sort of panic starts to set in, and then I start to breathe and just let myself go. My point is that at some point I go into fight or flight, so the fear.
Yeah.
And through the breath work, I'm able to go from my sympathetic to my parasympathetic nerve.
Yeah.
When I get out of that water, as you know, Ebony, because I know you do this as well, it is the most powerful reset I have come across. And so magic is on the other side of fear quite often.
Well, and to me, cold water exposure and lots of other things are alchemy, are magic. Like they, and there are some situations which no amount of talking are ever going to change. And
I agree.
Sometimes just a somatic experience where your physiology is shifted is so powerful.
I couldn't agree more. And I mean, you know, that's why I do my podcast. And as you know, you've been on as a guest, because as a psychotherapist and counsellor, I recognise that somatic experience is so important. And some people get so stuck in their trauma that they need something else. And whether that is EMDR, whether that's you know, Koya, whether that's breathwork, whatever it is, there's a whole host of ways of accessing that somatically.
And it might be pushing it, but one of the things that I'm beginning to see is that as a neurodivergent person, there are lots of people experience this, but there are grooves in my brain. There are certain pattern loops that if I fall into, well, it's like they're so well worn and they're such a powerful force that no amount of talking is going to get me out of them, because I've argued for them, because I know I've been in them so many times and I can defend them. Like, I was talking with my dad actually the other day, who is a therapist, and he was asking me about how something's going, and I was like, there's just no point in going to therapy and talking about it anymore, because I'm far too smart. Like, I can argue or converse from any angle on it, but the water doesn't lie. Or, you know, or if I do yoga nidra, it doesn't work. And so I was talking about how I was doing a lot more somatic stuff around it, because I can't engage that part of my brain. There is no, it bypasses that part of my brain completely.
Yes, you haven't got, when you're in the water, you haven't got time to be intelligent.
Intelligence is not going to make it warmer. Like, no amount of intelligence is going to make it warmer. I can be so smart, so clever, but nothing is going to change. My cleverness, my mind is not going to change how cold it is.
No, you can't. There's just no cheating that process. I think that's the thing. And actually I've heard this. I've had several people over the years say that to me about therapy. It's just, well, I'll just outsmart my therapist. And some people wear that like a badge of honor. But I understand that, but I also understand that comes from this place of fear that we talk about. It's the fear of really allowing yourself to be authentic with somebody that you haven't yet formed a relationship with. And let's be quite honest here. Not every therapist is right for every client, you know, and
I think, and I talk about this a lot, and it's one of the reasons why I coach. Instead, there was definitely a time and a place for therapy for me at the beginning. And then there was a level where I couldn't go any further because I didn't know anything about them. And the power dynamic, whilst that really works for some people, and is beautiful to have this, you know, completely blank kind of slate place that they were coming into.
You're talking about a psychodynamic approach, aren't you?
Yeah.
Again, it works well for some people, but not for others. And that's not my modality. That isn't how I work. I mean, I have a presence on social media, so I I couldn't work like that, because
Yeah.
you can learn about my lived experience by watching my stories
And that's
on
a
Instagram.
choice, you know, it's a choice, and it's
Yes.
it's a considered one. Yeah.
It's because it's what works for me professionally and personally. It's what I benefited from. It's what I gained in a relationship with my therapists, when they were able to share, and also some of the psychoeducation that goes on with therapists, I think is very important. For example, for me, and I'm talking about this because it's relational, and I know we were talking about relationships and trust and fear. I was working with a therapist for a couple of years, and I was having a terrible time. I'd never experienced depression and anxiety like it, and I really thought I was going mad. And I think I was about 39, 40. And menopause and perimenopause hadn't even crossed my mind. And thank God for this therapist, because she signposted me to a menopause clinic, and that was the start of my menopause journey and my understanding of how the menopause impacts mental health. And you know, thank goodness, because I would have gone to my GP and they would have prescribed me incorrectly with antidepressants, and that's not what I needed. What I needed was estrogen and progesterone, and once I started to have that, then I started to balance out.
Yeah.
Again, another hormone, just like dopamine.
Well, and this is the thing, this is why working with the brain alone, or the head brain alone, is not enough, because we're not heads on sticks.
No,
exactly
that.
I'm going to wrap up this bit of the conversation. I have loved this, and I feel like we could go deeper. And if people want to come and explore working with you, or talking about their relationships, or their own, you know, their menopause journey, their cold water, you know, all of those things, where's the best place for them to come and find out more?
Well, I have an Instagram presence and a Facebook presence, What's Your Therapy? And I've also got a website, which is, I can't actually remember what it is now, but it'll be
good. I'm going to put all the links in so you can click. You sent them over.
For you. But yeah, they'll be in the show notes.
They'll be in the show notes.
And I would be more than happy to connect with anyone that wants to talk about anything that we've been talking about today.
Great, thank you so much. And I think in the next bit, just in case you're listening, you're like, what are they going to talk about in Sacrosanct Secrets? We're going to talk a little bit about parenting and neurodiversity. Just I have a question I want to ask you. So
perfect.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.